Mac OS X version 10.5.1 and later now includes an application firewall you can use to control connections on a per application basis rather than a per protocol basis, and it is switched off by default. If you want to find it, you go to System Preferences, Security and Privacy, and you go here to the Firewall tab, and you can see here it is switched off. So we can switch it on, and we can see it's green, and then we look at the firewall options, and you can see the very limited firewall options. This firewall does not have the ability to monitor nor block outgoing connections via this GUI, which is really poor. This screen here is only concerned about blocking incoming connections. So I could, if I wished, add an application. So if we look here, Firefox, add, and then I have two choices here. I can allow incoming connections to Firefox, or I can block incoming connections to Firefox, or whatever other application it is that you happen to choose. Let's remove that. Other options are automatically allow signed software to receive incoming connections. Not particularly useful. You can enable stealth mode, which will disable some ICMP traffic, which is ping essentially. Kind of useful. And probably the most useful setting is block all incoming connections, but it does allow some of the basic internet services, as it calls them, such as DHCP, which we'll need in most cases, Bonjour and IPsec. And that's really it as far as the GUI goes. It's very simple. No monitoring, no controlling of outgoing connections. Besides using the GUI, you can also configure the application firewall from the command line. The utilities are stored in this directory here. This is the default configuration file, which you can see here, which looks like this. And the running configuration file is this one that you see here. You can stop the firewall using the launchctl command, using this command. And also this command here. So that has unloaded the application firewall, and now we can start the application firewall by simply changing unload to load. For both of these, and it is back again. And you can configure the application firewall using this socket filter fw command. I've got this -H switch for the help. So you can see the options here. So it is actually possible to do a little bit more, but not very much. So that is the Mac OS X application firewall. Not particularly useful. Certainly can't block those outgoing connections. You can block ingoing connections, which of course is useful in certain circumstances and is probably worth having set. But of course you will need to enable all of the services that you do need to connect inbound. Packet Filter, or PF Firewall, is a BSD licensed stateful packet filter that allows firewalling in OS X. It is comparable to NetFilter and IP tables in Linux that we've already gone through, but for BSD and OS X. It's currently available in Lion, which is OS X 10.7 and above, so Mountain Lion, Mavericks, Yosemite, El Capitan. And it provides the full functionality of an IP firewall, such as IP tables, at the network and transport layer. Previous versions of Mac OS X were running the now obsolete IPFW firewall, which was also developed for OpenBSD. You will need root or sudo to be able to use it. The main configuration file that controls how PF functions is etc/pf.conf, which looks like this and has some explanatory information at the beginning that's worth reading if you're thinking about using this firewall. Now, what you can see here are what are called anchors. Anchors are a collection of rules and tables, and we have two anchor files being loaded in here. So we can see this one, which is the default anchor file that comes with OS X, and we also have this one, a second anchor file, which I've added myself. So it is possible to put your firewall configuration within this file, but OS X complains if you do that, because potentially the configuration could get wiped. So if you create another anchor file here and put your rules in there and use the same syntax that I have, you'll be able to add your rules in there. So let's exit out of this. pfctl is the main command for PF. pfctl-sr will show the rule set, and you can see we have the default Apple ones and the Nathan one that I mentioned that I have added. -ss will show the current state table. -si will show filter stats and counters. And -sa will essentially show everything. If we go back to the config file again, go down to the bottom, and you can see the anchor file that I've created there. So let's take a look at that one. And this shows you the syntax for how PF accepts rules. If you watch the IP tables video, you'll recognize that I've duplicated some of the rules in PF. So for example, these top two rules, these are the same as what I showed in IP tables. The rules will allow all inbound and outbound packets destined for the local host interface to be accepted. And as I said before, this is because generally many software applications require them to be able to communicate with the local host adapter. So that's pass in quick on LO0 all. And then we have blocking all inbound traffic and blocking all outbound traffic. So those are like the default rules or like the default policy for a chain in IP tables. Here we're blocking non-routable IP addresses. Here, pass in quick INET proto UDP from any port 67 to any port 68. That is enabling DHCP. And here we're allowing ICMP from the local network 192.168.1.0 with the subnet mask of /24. So that's ping. And I've got a couple of rules here that have been hashed out, which allow TCP and UDP traffic out if they are unhashed, and also keep the state for the returning traffic. Let's pop back to the other window. Now this command here, the -v -n-f, and then the config file, I can test to see if those rules that I have in the anchor file will work correctly. And you can see it loading the rules here, and this is the one from my anchor file. And you can see they're all loading here, and there's no errors, so that is fine. Now, if you want to enable the rules onto the firewall, use the -f switch and the config file. So that's that done. I'm going to put the firewall into verbose mode with the -v. And then we want to enable the firewall with the -e, and you will get the PF enabled. If you do -d, that will disable the firewall. So the firewall will now be enabled with those rules that you saw. So that means, because we have the block, that we shouldn't be able to do, for example, HTTP outbound. So let's try that. And as you can see, it's not even able to resolve the domain name via DNS, which is as we would expect. So if I edit this file here and enable outbound connections for TCP and UDP, save this file, then I'll test the config again. That all looks good. We can see the 2 new rules at the bottom. -F to load the rules again. And then we should be able to do outbound connections again. And there you go. The application firewall and the PF firewall work in combination together. And let me give you a demonstration of that working. So you can see here we have the Apple default anchor here. So what we're going to do is check out that anchor file. And we can see in here we have another anchor file for the application firewall. The application firewall enables PF by using the PF_E in addition to its own rules. Application firewall generates a dynamic set of rules for PF through the anchor point that you see here. So let's have a look if there are any current rules through this anchor point. And I can do it with this command here, with the -A and pointing at that anchor point, and -S to look at the rules. And we can see there are no rules enabled through the application firewall anchor. But let's go into the application firewall GUI. And let's enable the stealth mode. And there we go. So now you can see that we have some PF rules to drop ICMP for IP4 and also for IPv6. So you can see that the application firewall is using PF in order to do its firewalling. So I hope that's given you a little overview of PF. Like IP tables, it can take a little time to understand and get used to, but it is very, very powerful, but does only work at the network and transport layer and not the application layer. You can use the man page for more information, which is reasonably good. Some other useful resources, there's the OpenBSD's PF user guide. It is for BSD, but a lot of the configuration and switches are completely the same as it's the same product. There's also a good guide here. Again, it's for BSD, but applies to Mac OS X. There's a simple and basic guide here. There's a cheat sheet here. And there's a very good manual here. Perhaps start on this one if you're a beginner to PF Firewall. So that's PF Firewall, but there are ways to manipulate it using GUIs, and we'll talk about that now.